Yo, this is Ionis bringing you a as quick as I can make it overview of the closed test for the local/live integration of IonBC 2. I'll be going over simple setup, some UI elements, hotbars, buttons, and triggers to hopefully form a good foundation to get everybody started. A quick note, this is fairly early access and I'm still expanding and implementing features, so please do expect some issues here and there and feel free to report them to me over on Discord. And without further ado, let's dive on into it. Alright, so let's go over the setup a little bit here. We got our IonBC compressed zip file here. We're going to open this bad boy up. We're going to see our IonBC folder here. We're going to extract it, and it's as easy as that. If you already have an existing IonBC folder, just extract this stuff straight to that folder and override everything, and you'll be good to go. From there, we're going to open our IonBC directory. We're going to open IonBC, and the first thing we'll have to do is go through the UAC prompt, which will open up our license activation window. So what you're going to do at this point is you're going to take the provided license key. I'm just going to paste that right in there. And then the Discord username, which will be your Discord username or the Discord username of the owner of the license. As our tooltip says here, if this license was shared with you, you entered the Discord username of the license owner, not your own username. So from there, we're just going to click Activate on our license, and this will load us on through. We're going to get our EULA here. I'm not going to go over it in its entirety. You can read through it if you want. So for this video, we're going to go over the local features for IonBC 2, as this is an overview of the local feature parity. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a profile. So let's click the Add button here. This will open our local profile designer. This is where we're going to actually designate the processes that we're going to use our local iteration for. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hit Add Process. This is going to open up a file dialog where you can kind of scope to whatever process you want. Just keep in mind that the local version of IonBC is agnostic, so you can really use it with whatever application you want, but it hasn't really been tested with every single thing humanly possible. But for the sake of this demo, we're going to dive into an application that we know it works for. So we're going to load up EverQuest here in our processes. So as you can see, we've loaded up 5 EQ game processes here. We're going to give them each a custom name fitting to our characters. So as you can see, we have our 5 EQ game processes here. We're going to give them each a custom name to reflect the characters we'll be playing on them. And not every single process may have required launch options, but EverQuest does to bypass Launchpad here. So we're going to enter our launch options in here. Once that's done, you want to simply give it a name. Let's call it Cool Local Profile. Then click Save. So we got our cool local profile here. If you ever need to edit it, just click this big edit button over here while it's highlighted, or double click on the row and it'll open the local profile designer for you. From here, we're going to launch this local profile, and if you are a first-time user, it will pop up this local injection notice. This is essentially a warning that the local integration of IonBC 2 uses a minimally invasive thread injection over the windows on execution, simply to give them an identifier for the application to know where to send commands to. If this is an issue that you have and you are a little worried of the risks from that, then you can feel free to click Go Back and not use the local integration method. Otherwise, if we click Proceed, this will launch our clients up and we will be good to go. Alright, here we are fully loaded into the Steam Font Mountain, so let's get into some hotbar and button functionality. So every iteration of IonBC 2 for this closed test will come packaged with its own local profile that you can use as a base to start off your own IonBC 2 adventure. But if you want to start from scratch and you want a new hotbar, you can always click this button right here, which will launch a new local hotbar. But for now, we're going to load up our pre-packaged default hotbar here, and we're going to take a look at some of the buttons. So essentially, what these user-generated buttons do in the context of the local integration is give the user the ability to send any variety of inputs dynamically across any number of designated clients. So to give you an example, let's very quickly scope into our All Follow button here, which will open our All Follow button in the button designer for editing. As you can see, this button targets clients, which means that every single background client will receive and process this following command. So as you can see here, it targets Drekor, it pauses for 1 second, and then it follows. So if we go ahead and get out of our button designer, and then we go over and we click our All Follow button here, you'll see every single client targeted Drekor and then started following. Now you can get as simple or as complicated with the workflow of these. Obviously our All Follow button is relatively simple, where our Shaman Buff button here is a little bit more complicated. It's really entirely up to you. They're fully dynamic, so you can do really whatever you want with the system. Now I'd like to go a little bit more in depth into the button designer, just to go over every single field and structure, just so we can have kind of a basic understanding of what everything does. So in our General tab here, we have our name field, which is the name of the button. Then we have targets, which is the targets for the command, which is essentially the window that will be processing the sent command. This could be all if you want to target every single process. It could be clients if you only want to target the background processes. It could be host if you want to target the foreground process, or any number of comma delimited targets that you'd like based off of what you named your processes. In my case, if I wanted a button that targeted the Bard and the Berserker, I'd do something like this. Or let's say I wanted a button that just targeted the Shaman, we'd do something like that. For Mouse 1 and Mouse 2, these work a little differently for the local integration than the networked version of IonBC. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to select your target client. So let's say you want the Shaman to click one of the mouse buttons. Then you're going to click which mouse button you want that client to press. So say Mouse 1, Mouse 2, but let's say in this case we want Mouse 1. That'll pop up this overlay over that designated client. Then we're going to click, let's say we want him to press this spell slot here. That will give us this command here. And then if we take the button that we've created with that Mouse 1 command in it and we click it, the Shaman will then click that spell slot. Now this also works if the process is in the background as well, so if we click this while we're on our Shadow Knight here, our Shaman will also click the spell slot. So very quick overview of the design tab here. This is obviously a very minimalist engine for designing the buttons. You can change the font, weight, you can change colors for the background, the text, the keybind, the CD. You have the width and the height here. Font size, keybind font size, which we'll get into the keybinds here shortly. So it's a fairly simple designer, but you can do quite a little bit with it. Over into settings here, we'll go through these one by one. You have keybind, which is just as it says. It is a keybind that you can assign to the button. So if we go Left-Shift-S here, and then let's just make a little test button that targets our host, and our host will say hello. We save that, and then we press Left-Shift-S. Our host says hello. These have two separate functionalities. We'll go over repeater first. So if we enable repeater, we can designate a number of seconds here. And based on that number of seconds, it will continue to do the action repeatedly until disabled. So let's go ahead and set that to 5 seconds, and we'll save our button again here. Then you'll see when a button is a repeater, it has this little red light up here indicating whether it's enabled or disabled. So there's a little bit of visual feedback there. We'll press our Left-Shift-S, and that will start a repeater, and every 5 seconds, we will now say hello. Now, there's a couple of little niches with repeaters here. Obviously, you can see that overlay, which is kind of a visual representation of how long until it repeats the action, but also if you hover over it, you'll get a little tooltip which will tell you exactly how long it will be until the next action fires. Back in our button designer here, in a similar vein, cooldown is basically a button lockout. So if we enable cooldown and we set 10 seconds here, then we go over and we click save. We then click this. We'll say hello, but we cannot click it again. Now if we hover over it, it has the same functionality of being able to see when that will actually be back up and available for clicking. But this essentially locks you out of activating this button again until the cooldown is done. If we accidentally set an arbitrarily long cooldown, let's say God knows how long that is, we save that, we click this. We can see, oh no, we're locked out of this for 11 days and 13 hours. You can simply right-click it. That will take the cooldown off, and you can go in and fix your cooldown. Now that we've gone over cooldown and repeater, let's go into the advanced section of our button designer. So the first thing we'll go over is interval strength here. So interval strength is essentially a number that seeds our back-end algorithm to determine the speed of inputs sent. This is to make it look a lot less robotic, so not every single thing is happening at exactly the same time all the time. As you move the interval strength down, the ranges will get tighter, so it will process faster. As you move the interval strength up, the ranges will get wider and longer, so they will process slower. All buttons default to 80, which I found is kind of a sweet spot for security, while also having buttons and commands still process at a relatively fast pace. Next, we have our client randomization slider. This seeds the randomization of the client side of things, so think speed of receiving commands, order of client processing, all of that kind of stuff. So this is just another security layer to kind of make things look a bit more human and to give a little bit more of a randomization into the back end using a seeded algorithm. Now you can overwrite these two by using custom key interval by flipping this here and setting an interval with a range, or just if you want it to happen every 10 milliseconds, however you're feeling. I would advise against this, as these security layers are here for a reason, but if you feel like you want to kind of overwrite these security layers and just throw caution to the wind, I've left the option to do so. Now let's go over interrupts. So interrupts essentially enables the button to interrupt any ongoing action or command and immediately process the sent command. So say your shaman's buff rotation just started and you just got trained and you desperately need to start spam healing your tank. Clicking interrupts will let you do that. If interrupts enabled, then you're on a heal button and you click that spam heal button. It will immediately cut off that buff rotation right where it is and immediately just start spam healing that tank. The interrupts wait field here essentially gives you a buffer before it will interrupt. So if you want to add a buffer onto the button, like wait 500 milliseconds before interrupting or anything like that, you can do so here. And then you have the stops casting toggle, which is tied to interrupts, which will allow you to press a keybind before processing the sent command. This is for games like EverQuest or World of Warcraft, where you may have long cast times that might get kind of gunked up with the command you're trying to send over. So clicking this will allow you to immediately throw a keybind before the command gets processed to stop casting, so that command goes uninterrupted and entirely clean. So the last thing I want to go over with the button designer right here is the exposed button ID. So this ID is used in a command called /click. What /click allows you to do is to click buttons dynamically in line with commands. So if we copy this ID here and then we go over to a /click I already have set up, we paste that ID through here. This button will allow us to click this button. So now if we go over and we click our click assist button here, we should say hello. Looks like we still have that cooldown enabled. Let's get rid of that as well. But as you can see, it said hello. Now this command may seem a little redundant, but it's very useful when using something like triggers or events to kind of fire button clicks dynamically, but we'll go over that when we get to the triggers and events section. Now before we move on, I just wanted to go over our little toolbar controls up here. So very quickly on our toolbar, we can click this to open the button designer for adding a new button. We can click this to save our current hotbar. We have our Save GUI button here, which will save a collection of hotbars if we have them open. Our Load button here will open up this panel with two combo boxes, which we can then use to dynamically load any hotbar or GUI. Our Delete button here will allow us to actively select a GUI or hotbar for deletion. And the Button Manager button right here is currently unused. It is for a planned feature that has not been instantiated yet. Now over on the right here, we have our color swatch. This will open our color wheel, which we can use to dynamically change the color of our hotbar. We're going to set that right back to red. We have a close all button up here, which will close every single open hotbar. We have the standard close button here, which will close just this specific hotbar. We have the reset button here, which requires a confirmation as it will reset everything on the hotbar to default, including all button positions, brush, height, width, everything. We have the lock and unlock button here. When a hotbar is locked, none of the buttons can move and they can be clicked to activate them. When the hotbar is unlocked, you can grab a button, drag it around, snap it to place in the grid, resize it using the Chrome, reset it back to its defaults here, or delete it. Quick note on unlocked hotbars: when you click a button while the hotbar is unlocked, the commands will not be sent or processed, so just keep that in mind. To be able to actually send commands to clients, you have to relock the hotbar. Also, when a hotbar is unlocked, you can drag its edges to resize it, and you can click any empty space within the hotbar and drag while holding down mouse 1 to move it around. Now, lastly on our toolbar, we have the broadcast button. When this is clicked, all keystrokes are broadcasted live to all clients. As you can see, when I move forward, they move forward. When I move backwards, they move backwards. We want to run in circles. We're all going to run in circles. This counts for all chat commands, pretty much any keystroke input. So if I want everybody to wave, let's say, I can type /wave. Everyone to sit, I can type /sit. And then if I want everyone to stand back up, we can throw a /stand in there. Mouse inputs are also broadcasted. So if I hold my right click down here to move my camera and then I move left and right, you'll see we're all doing a little bit of a shimmy. And then if I just tap my left mouse button and move a little bit forward, they'll all move a little bit forward with me. So that's the broadcasting feature here. You can toggle this on and off at will, and it will broadcast everything to all clients available. Two more small controls to go over here. We have our minimize button here, which will just minimize the hotbar so it's barely visible. We can then re-maximize it. And we have our toolbar button here, which will hide and show the toolbar. Alright, that's it for a quick overview of buttons and hotbars. We have a couple more things to go over, which will be a lot quicker, as that's kind of like the meat and potatoes of the application. The next thing we're going to move into is the control page on the main window, which controls our events and triggers. Alright, so over here back on our main window, if we go into our little control page here, we go from the networked version to the local version of triggers here. This is what you're going to see. So triggers are, for lack of a better term, an advanced log reader. It will essentially take a file or multiple files that you input, read them for certain events, and when they happen, trigger certain commands. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add a profile here. So we're going to click that plus button right there. This will open our local trigger profile designer. Now this may look a little bit familiar to you, as we do reuse this for the local profile designer. So the flow is relatively the same, but we're going to click add log here. From there, we're going to navigate to our log file for EverQuest specifically, as that is the process we are currently using. Once there, we're going to add all of the logs that we want to read from. Now that we have all of our logs that we want to read from, we're going to name our profile. Let's just name it Cool Local Triggers. Save that up, and we'll have our profile now loaded in here. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to click this Add button here. This will open up our trigger designer. So there's quite a bit to go over here, and it works a little differently when compared to the networked trigger designer, so I'll try to go over these relatively quickly so we can kind of move past this without spending too much time on it. So first and foremost, we have our name. This is obviously just the name of our trigger, plain and simple. Whatever you put in here will end up being whatever the name of the trigger is. Then we have our trigger field. This is the event that will fire the command. We're going to go into a little bit more detail here later, but for now, just know that this is where we kind of want to put what's going to be read from the log to trigger the command. Then we have our command. This is what we're going to do reactively when the trigger is actually triggered. We have our targets field down here, mirrors the same functionality as our user-generated button targets. These are the clients that will be hit with the command when the trigger fires. Then we have our log grid down here. You're going to want to enable each one of these that you want the event to fire from. So what that means is, let's say we only want this to fire from our Shadow Knights log or our Berserkers log. So what we would do is we would check mark both of these so they're both enabled, and when we save this button, it will only read for this trigger event from these two logs. Now we go over exclusivity. This is where we have a lot more tighter control over who, what, when, where gets to actually fire our event. So for the blacklist, essentially you can blacklist any word, character, phrase, anything you want. If it's included in that line on the log, it will not fire the event. So let's say my name Frog has been pissing me off by spamming me all day for goddamn teleports. I put my name Frog into my blacklist. They get ignored. On the opposite end of that spectrum, we have the whitelist. If you have content in the whitelist, the trigger will only fire if something within the line matches something within the whitelist. And just like the targets field, both of these take comma-delimited lists, so if you want multiple things in the blacklist or multiple things in the whitelist, you're free to do so. Next, we have only trigger if player is from guild. This is obviously specifically targeted towards games, specifically MMOs. If you enable this, it will whoever triggers the trigger. There are two things that are required for this. The first is the guild that you want to check for, and you'll also need the player rejects from the command and trigger. Don't worry about this right now, we will go over this later. Moving on to the miscellaneous tab, if you have is disabled toggled, it's pretty obvious, the trigger will not be enabled. Ignore social, also fairly obvious, it will ignore all social channels, so tell, say, shout, I don't know, yell? Is yell still a thing? It's been a long time. Any social channels, they'll all be ignored. Say to guild, to group, they're all ignored. We have trigger lockout, so trigger lockout will prevent the trigger from triggering again until a certain amount of time has passed. So let's say you have a bard trigger that allows you to restart melody every time you're stunned. It can be pretty useful in that scenario because let's say your tank pulled 400 mobs and doesn't have any AE aggro control because we're playing in Classic, so the bard's going to take song aggro and you're getting stunned 20 times every 5 seconds. This won't trigger 20 times. You can set it to 5,000 milliseconds right there, which is equal to 5 seconds, and now it'll only trigger once every 5 seconds. For non-local targeting, this is disabled in the local integration, so you don't have to worry about this. And under Advanced, you'll find exactly the same structures as we went over in the user-generated button overview. So I'm not going to go over these again. You can skip back to that if you want to know what these do, but these are all identical to what they were in that overview. Alright, so back to general here. Let's go over rejects a little bit. So in IonBC, certain declarations will allow you to replace certain words that would be in a trigger or command phrase with a word from the log line dynamically. So as a very basic example, I'm going to do a simple tell response chain. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to type out this declaration. So this is how you declare a rejects in IonBC. And what this will allow you to do is to dynamically take this word placement within the trigger and utilize it within the command. So for example, if we want to get whoever sent us a tell and then immediately send them a tell back, we would do something like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this from our Berserker's log, and then we're going to target him. And when we send our Berserker any tell, he should respond to us asking why we're talking to him. So now we're going to give this a name, and then we're going to save it. You can see it's enabled. We're going to want to toggle on events here. We're going to go into our EverQuest client. We're going to tell Perjury, hey, you're a cool guy. And we're on Fiona Vi. And I don't know Elvish, so we're going to tell him the right way. Hey, you're a cool guy. Just like that. And he will respond to us with nothing. And then you're going to go back into the IonBC window. You're going to double-click this trigger because you're an asshole and you wrote the wrong phrase. And you wrote the wrong target. Then you're going to click Save and go back to your client. And from there, we're going to send Perjury a tell, telling him he's a really cool guy. And he's going to send us a tell back, which is nonsense because I'm on Fiona Vi and none of my tunes know Elvish. Rejects in IonBC isn't just limited to a single declaration either. You can have as many as you want. Here I've set up a trigger for whenever anyone gets a tell that is under Perjury's log here. And it will respond with a group message of who sent the tell and what the tell was. So if we go back here and we send Perjury a tell here, you'll see he responded, but because we're on Fiona Vi and we don't know any similar languages, we're going to have to tab over, and you can see that he said, Drecker has sent me the tell, how are you doing? So let's move on to an example that has quite a few more rejects declarations in it. As you can see, we have a rejects for the name, and then a rejects for 4 different words or phrases that are within the tell itself. Our command then splits each of these off into their own individual group message. If we send the tell, how are you doing, to our good old Berserker Perjury there, we get back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 messages. If we hop over to our Berserker, we'll see these translate to, Drekor, how are you doing? Which is exactly what we're looking for there. Now, if we send Perjury the tell, how are you doing, I am a fool, here, you'll see that we still get the 5 messages back, but that 5th regex actually returns the full message. So outside of tail cycling, let's get a real-world example of when you would use triggers. It's a relatively simple example, but we're going to use a simple buff refresh on expiration here. So as you can see here, we have our very important buff refresh trigger. The trigger is your X spell has worn off of Y in this case, and in the command we target Y, which is the player, and then we pause to allow the server tick to kind of tick over and catch up so we can see the target, and then we cast X, which is the spell. We're reading on the shaman's log, and we're targeting the shaman, so the shaman will be the one to recast this. So back in our game here, we can see our Shadow Knight with our extremely important Ultra Vision buff that we can't do without. If we move over to our Shaman, just for example's sake, you can see we're actually targeted on the Bard here. So if I go back to the Shadow Knight and I click off Ultra Vision, what the Shaman should do is target us and recast Ultra Vision. And there you have it. So let's return back to that click command that we were talking about earlier. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this ID here. First, we're going to turn this repeater off. So this is just a regular old button here. Then we're going to take this ID from our Shaman buff button. We're going to come over here in our triggers, and we're going to actually add a new trigger. So we're going to use this trigger to recycle our full buff line whenever the one with the shortest duration expires. Alright, so now that we have our all-important buff refresh trigger set up here, let's take a look at it. So we have our trigger here, which will obviously trigger whenever Spirited by Leave fades on anybody, but also, instead of having that full command, we just pass a virtual click to our Shaman buff button. So this will constantly recycle buffs without having to put this on a repeater as soon as By Lee wears off of anyone. So now that we're back in the game, let's give it a shot. Let's click off By Lee and see if we get a full buff refresh. Alright, as you can see here, we got our full buff refresh. You would think after 20 years of playing this game, I would be able to recognize that regeneration / regrowth or whatever has a shorter duration timer than By Lee, but here we are. So that's a pretty simple example of how to get a full automated buff cycle using triggers, virtualizing clicks with the button IDs. Let's move on to the next thing. Alright, hopefully that gives everybody a good foundation to start from. If you have any questions or have any issues, feel free to hit me up on Discord. I'll leave it in the description down below in case anybody doesn't have it at this point. A quick note here, if you're looking for this to kind of replace this macro that's a part of this program or any form of full automation, you're probably not going to find it necessarily within IonBC 2. It is intended to have a pilot at all times, regardless of what you can accomplish with it. And it's unlikely that I will ever actually support full automation. With that being said, I hope you enjoy your experience using IonBC 2, and happy hunting!